Donald Trump is the first former US president to face criminal charges in connection with hush money paid to an adult film actress. He says the prosecution is a witch hunt. So what does it mean for Trump and more broadly for American politics? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Donald Trump is expected to appear before a New York court on Tuesday. He'll be the first former or sitting US president to face criminal charges. Those charges have not yet been revealed, but a grand jury has been investigating a payment in exchange for the silence of an adult film actress. Stormy Daniels allegedly had an extramarital affair with Trump, which he's always denied. If the money was paid and not disclosed during the 2016 election campaign, it would amount to a criminal offence. Media reports in the US suggest the former president may be facing other charges. Trump denies all wrongdoing and says he's the victim of a witch hunt by the Democrats, accusing them of trying to prevent his return to the White House. The man who served as his vice president says Trump's political opponents are behind the prosecution.
First, let me just say, I think the unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States for a campaign finance issue is an outrage. And I think it's clear to the overwhelming majority of the American people that this is nothing short of a political prosecution being affected by a Manhattan DA who literally campaigned on bringing charges against one particular American. And I must tell you that that should be offensive to every American, left, right, and center. Every American deserves equal treatment under the law. And I believe the American people will see this for what it is.
So how do the American people see it? Well, we'll get some analysis from our guests in just a moment. But on the streets, opinions are sharply divided.
If Trump got arrested for the charges they're talking about now, I would vote for him 10 times over, okay? Because if he was a Democrat, it would never come up. And I just don't believe there's anything to it, and even if there is, so what? You know, it's his own private life.
Yeah, I know that Donald Trump's being arrested or indicted for maybe a possible arrestment this week, and I think that's just the far left again, just another attack on Donald Trump. And they're getting very tiresome, and again, Donald Trump is for America, and he fights for Americans. The far left doesn't like that, and so that's why they keep attacking him.
Well, I just think that he has to accept his responsibility for all the things he's done. And this has been a lifelong thing with him. He's been doing the wrong thing. If it was any other American citizen, he would have been in jail a long time ago.
There should be a lot more cases should be coming his way. But absolutely, I think it's about time.
OK, let's bring in our guests. And in Washington, D.C., Adolfo Franco, Republican strategist and chief counsel to the chairman of the International Relations Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives. From Philadelphia, Claire Finkelstein is a professor of law and faculty director at the University of Pennsylvania's Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law. And in Cancun, Mexico, is Rina Shah, the founder of Rilax Strategies, a political and public affairs communications firm. She's also a former Republican Party political advisor. A very warm welcome to all of you. Adolfo, let's start with your reaction to this indictment, because you've called what Trump is going through here political martyrdom. What do you mean by that?
Well, persecution first and martyrdom if whatever happens here, the damage has been done, even if the president is found not to be guilty. But one of the things that you failed to do in your intro is to report that these matters, of course, are 7 years old and have been looked at by the federal authorities, the FEC, federal prosecutors, and in fact, Mr. Bragg himself, and they were all discarded and found to be baseless in terms of any violation that would be pursued. So they were never pursued. And in fact, the state statute that this is based on has expired, the misdemeanor. This is a state prosecutor, so it's a novel theory of bootstrapping this to go back to a supposed federal felony that already had been dismissed by the FEC and federal prosecutors. But what I make of it, in terms of the, apart from that, that is why this is nonsense to begin with, is this is part of, I think, round 9 or 10 of trying to, if you will, get Donald Trump. There was a call for his impeachment by one of the impeachment managers, by the way, before Donald Trump took office. So this has been the Democrat playbook from the beginning of eliminating Donald Trump as, first of all, a president initially by trying to remove him before he was even sworn in, which is silly. And of course, now preventing him being the front runner for the Republican nomination from being elected again. What I make of it is total fear by the Democratic Party that Donald Trump would be nominated and then elected in 2024. So it's a tragic day for our country and for the rule of law.
OK, I'll bring in Rina in just a moment to respond to some of what you've said there. First of all, I just want to pick up on this statute of limitations, the case being 7 years old. It's an interesting point that has been brought up quite a bit in the media. Claire, you're an expert in these matters. Explain what this means, because this statute of limitations, it has indeed expired, hasn't it, for misdemeanors and felonies in this case. But I understand that New York law has a couple of ways of stopping the clock. Can you explain a few of these technicalities for us?
Well, the first and most important thing I want to say in response to Adolfo is that we have not seen the indictment yet. So I think all judgments about the strength of these charges needs to be delayed until we see the indictment. We understand, report has it, that it's about a 34 count indictment, having to do with the fact that there were a series of payments to Stormy Daniels, plus a number of other charges under New York law. And we just have to wait and see what they say and to see what the evidence is. That may not be unsealed anytime soon unless Donald Trump himself decides to reveal it, or it may be revealed after the arraignment, which by all reports is going to happen on Tuesday. The details on New York law are complicated, but it is my understanding that there are reasons why the statute of limitations does not apply in this case, and that the fact that it is that there is misreporting on Donald Trump's finances on repeated occasions relating to this, boost this to a felony from a misdemeanor, and that therefore the statute of limitations has not run. OK. Rina, let's pick up on the other part of Adolfo's statement. He was saying this is a Democratic playbook. This whole indictment, the Democrats have tried many times before to remove Trump from running for president. Is this not just another case of the same thing playing out? What do you think of this indictment?
In watching Donald Trump over the years, I've seen his behavior become more erratic as he gets more scared of losing power. And of course, he lost the 2020 election. He was impeached 2 times in Congress, but he was not charged with and kicked out of office, basically. There was no crime that he was ever charged for before now. And I think that's a really important distinction we have to make, is that there were always accusations, there were always allegations, but this was a long time coming. I always had felt for years that Trump would be the one to do himself in. He plays fast and loose with the rules. He's often made statements over the years, whether he was in the White House or not, sort of saying that I'm above the law. And well, in the United States, we know that. We have a constitution. Nobody's above the law. A former president especially does not stand up before, any special tribunal or anything. They're equal. And like every other American citizen, they face the same, again, a jury of their peers, the same laws they're held accountable to. And that's one thing that I think has sort of been lost here, because it has been a long time. This investigation took a while. It came from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I understand how people feel that this is confusing and why now and how did we get here? And because this indictment, the charges are still sealed, we don't fully know. But I think it's important to also say what is the biggest takeaway here? And it's that we are a nation of laws and that the rule of law does reign supreme. The minute a newly elected president takes the oath of office, that former president becomes a private citizen. And that is what I see happening here, is the wheels of justice holding Donald Trump, a now private citizen, accountable to the same laws that I'm accountable to as an American citizen.
I can see Adolfo wanting to jump in here.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. Let me start out with Rina's comments. First of all, about power and the rest of it, we're talking about events that were 7 years ago. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump doing himself in. This is rewriting history here. First of all, the Stormy Daniels controversy emerged before the election, Rina, and the American people decided to elect President Trump. The idea that Rina's comments that this hasn't been looked at, it was investigated for years by federal prosecutors, who a couple of them even quit over this matter for years, and by Mr. Bragg himself. This was resurrected by a political hack, Alvin Bragg, who is a politician. He runs for election, who said in the campaign he was running to get Donald Trump. That's the rule of law we're upholding, Rina? Persecution when somebody doesn't even have the evidence and is running on getting someone? So this is confirmation of this being exactly what it has been from the beginning. With the legal theories, you're absolutely right, Claire. Although a lot of leaks have been made, even about the indictment, is Mr. Bragg going to prosecute the people that are leaking? That's a felony. I haven't seen any remark in that, any effort in that effort, any remarks regarding any effort to do so. 34 counts. You can take, as a lawyer, and I am a lawyer, you can take anything and chop it up into 34 pieces. You're absolutely right. We don't know if there's anything new. What is new here, this has never been done in New York. This is unprecedented. The statute has indeed expired. There's a statute of limitations.
Okay, well, we have dealt with that. That's a grey area. That is a grey area. Claire, I want to pursue this.
But it's important to understand this idea of 34. We'll see what they are. You'll see most of those dismissed and chopped up. You can, just because you say 34
well, we don't
times
know. This is all speculation at this point. Let's wait until, as you say, we see what the charges are on Tuesday. Claire, why, and Adolfo does bring up a good point, why does Alvin Bragg pursue this case? This inquiry has been open and shut so many times, it's got the nickname of a zombie case. Its predecessor decided not to chase it. Why has he gone for it?
Okay, first let me just, for 1 second, circle back on the statute of limitations. Okay. There's an additional point that I forgot to mention, which is that Donald Trump has been out of the jurisdiction continuously. So in addition to the fact that felonies have a longer statute of limitation than misdemeanors, he has not been in the jurisdiction, and the statute of limitations is what's called tolled, meaning that the statute of limitations stops to run when the defendant is not in the jurisdiction. Now, on the issue of why Alvin Bragg is bringing this case, it's rather a matter of why it wasn't brought before, I would say, because the predecessor, Cyrus Vance, to Alvin Bragg, it seemed was about to bring the case. Everybody thought it was going to be brought, or at least something in this domain was going to be brought. And then he suddenly retired. And there's been nonstop pressure, not only from Donald Trump, of course, but from Trump's supporters and adherents, and even from members of Congress. The threats to Alvin Bragg in the last week alone are horrendous, racist threats that he's being supported by George Soros, anti-Semitic threats, therefore, and a picture that Donald Trump posted with himself with a baseball bat next to the head of Alvin Bragg. So it's rather extraordinary that Alvin Bragg has the courage to go ahead and bring it at all, given the threats and, frankly, the lack of forthright support from the Justice Department. The Justice Department should be out there making statements that, given that the case has been brought, whether they would have brought it at this moment or not, that they will support Alvin Bragg and make sure that justice is done.
Rina, do you think that Alvin Bragg is is right to bring this case? I mean, it does sound, from what Claire's saying, that he's taken an incredibly brave road.
Forget brave. He took his time. He took a lot of time to get to where we got to this past week, and I think that's one thing we ought to be feel good about as Americans. That, you know, confident that our justice system takes time, and you know, look, justice is only there if accountability comes first. And this is the thing about former President Trump and his supporters. They think if they say something enough times that it becomes true. And I say if we're a nation of laws, we should want somebody held accountable for breaking a law, regardless of when that was. And I really believe that Donald Trump stands to only serve himself from this whole thing. He wants to be led on what is, quote unquote, a perp walk. He wants to be seen in handcuffs so he can raise money and elicit more sympathy. I think this is a fantastic time for the Republican Party to break away from Trump. This case is probably the smallest of all the legal charges that Trump has been accused of over the years. But it's always struck me the hypocrisy. The Family Values Party, the Republican Party that I made my career in, worked for many a candidate, worked for many an elected official that was a Republican that always put family values first. And here we have a case of a former president who had an extramarital affair while his wife was pregnant, I must add. It's disgusting. Prior to becoming a candidate, and wanted to hush up this porn star. And here we sit, and the Republicans are carrying the water for this guy. It's absolutely disgusting. Michael Cohen, the former lawyer to Donald Trump, faced charges. He did time. He did the crime. He did the time for Trump's actions. Now Trump himself is being held accountable. And I think the Republicans should just divorce themselves from Donald Trump. He's a ticking time bomb. He's near 80. He's a narcissist. He comes with a load of problems. Time for the Republican Party to choose someone new to put up in 2024. Okay. Donald Trump is not the guy.
Adolfo, are they going to do that?
Well, it's a lot there to, let me just answer your question because I just so much to do it. The only person that's 80, by the way, is the current president. Donald Trump's not 80,
Trump
the president's 80.
Don't forget it. He's
but
close.
let me say this about
okay.
Alvin. Let me say about Alvin Bragg being brave. Alvin Bragg is a hack. He's trying to run for attorney general or governor. Brave. This has just made himself history.
Okay.
There's nothing brave about it.
Adolfo, let's not forget, though, that we're trying to move forward in the discussion. Alvin Bragg perhaps has become slightly sidelined because let's not forget that it is actually a grand jury, Trump's peers, who have decided to move forward with this indictment. So it's not Alvin Bragg acting alone.
Let me tell you about grand juries. 98% of grand juries return indictments. Grand juries, you don't have a defense. Grand juries, like facing, you can get a ham sandwich indicted by a grand jury. So don't give me the grand jury stuff. Anybody can get indicted. The statistics show it. It's 98%. That's not a made-up number. That's the exact number. So that's just nonsense as well. This, as Rina has said, and you've said it in her remarks, so much for the rule of law. She's already convicted Donald Trump. So let's just dispense with the trial. And this is unfortunately.
You're making no sense.
Adolfo,
Mr. Adolfo,
no
you
sense?
are so
Do you think
you're so overcome with emotion
here,
about this. You don't want to look at the law. You're so emotional about it. You don't want to respect the law.
Not emotional.
You don't believe we're a nation of laws.
No, I do believe we're a nation of laws. This was examined. This was
then
resurrected.
You should want people held accountable
years ago
for their crimes.
You should be ashamed of yourself for supporting such nonsense.
Adolfo.
And so now, back to the Republicans.
You should be ashamed of yourself for becoming
Adolfo,
so
if I could just jump in here. Can I please jump in?
Back to the Republican question. Yes.
The process has been followed. Rina does make the point that this has taken an extraordinarily long time. Is the president ultimately above the rule of law?
This doesn't take a long time. You're misleading. You're misleading the audience here. This has not been 7 years. This was an open, as you reported earlier, just your own comments. This was an open and shut case. This case was shut by his predecessor. This was looked at for years, and determined there was no basis. This guy just ran for office on a get President Trump agenda. It's very recent. This doesn't take a long time. This has been exactly
then let's bring in Claire at this point. Claire, how important is it that this case is brought against Trump and that Trump does answer to it and not undermine it?
Listen, I have something to say to both of your other guests, which is in this country we have something called the presumption of innocence. And it applies to everyone who is indicted for a crime, everyone who is brought up against criminal charges, everyone who has to face a jury, and it applies to Donald Trump. So when he is indicted and when he is arraigned and when he faces a jury, if he faces a jury, he will benefit from that same presumption. Adolfo, you should want him to face a jury if these charges are still hanging around in the background, because as a political candidate and as an American, he needs to be cleared if he is not guilty of them. You should not be concerned if, as you said, he is not guilty
You're missing
of
a point. Should the charges have been brought in the first place is the key.
I'll just finish my sentence here.
This is a political agenda.
If he is not guilty of the charges, he ought to face the jury. He ought to testify. He ought to give his explanation for what happened here.
But this is political persecution.
And it does not matter. So I do not believe that the motive was examined is political. No prosecutor wants to face the storm of attacks that Alvin Bragg has been facing. His life is at risk from bringing these charges.
A storm. He ran on this. He ran on this proposition. He ran on getting Donald Trump.
Okay. Can I jump in with a question here? I have a question. Adolfo, we have a man here who is the former president of America. He's running to become the next president of America, undermining the systems that America is built on, undermining the rule of law, saying that this is a political witch hunt. How damaging is that for America, that you have a man who's running undermining the systems that it's based on?
But this isn't President Trump just saying this. This is virtually every elected Republican and tens of millions of Americans. Political persecution is political persecution. Just because a prosecutor has a political agenda, he's a politician, Alvin Bragg, and he ran on this proposition, you can't hide it under the rule of law. There's something called in our system as well, to educate the audience, called prosecutorial misconduct. And this is what's happened here. And this is when somebody is out to get someone. Again, this case has been reviewed by Democrat prosecutors and the federal government, and there was no basis. That wasn't enough. So we have to come back and resurrect it, even on a novel theory. When there is
I'm going to jump in here again because we're running out of time, and I do want to look ahead slightly to the next election. Donald Trump's already announced his campaign. We have got an interesting situation where his main rival for nominee is Ron DeSantis. He has fallen in line behind Donald Trump. How is all of this going to affect the Republican campaign for 2024? Rina.
Yeah, right now it's not surprising that Governor DeSantis is trying to appeal to those voters who are still stuck by Trump's side. That's the Make America Great Again movement types. But the these past November midterm elections really told us that the MAGA candidates do poorly. Senator Mitch McConnell himself has remarked many times about the poor candidate quality that Donald Trump has created in the Republican Party today. Governor DeSantis' strategic playbook, in my estimation, and I'm not currently advising him, is that he wants to see how much of the MAGA universe he can tear away from Trump. And he will take his time. He has not officially announced for 2024. He wants to see how he can sort of softly peel away, again, that demographic and have them come with him in due time. I think Governor DeSantis is also estimating, like I am, that Trump will not see this whole thing through, that he will not make it to the general of 2024. He will drop out perhaps in the early primaries just because he wants to. He's a guy that kind of does whatever he wants to, and I think he'll fundraise until he feels he's just too tired, because this is what this is all about. That is why you hear elected Republicans still sticking by Trump's side. They still see the power of his fundraising, and Governor DeSantis sees that too.
Claire, if we look at the timeline for this trial, it could be well into next year, getting very close to the actual presidential election. Can you fill us in on some of those details of this timeline?
Yes, and that indeed is my concern, which is, and unfortunately is feeding the narrative that this is politically motivated. The Justice Department has much more serious charges that could come out of a special counsel, namely seditious conspiracy or insurrection relating to January 6th, and possible espionage charges relating to the Mar-a-Lago classified documents issues, and Fannie Willis as well. And as I think that Alvin Bragg considered that it was better to get started than to wait to bring these charges much closer to the election. So already there is, sort of a feeding of the narrative, as we hear from our friend Adolfo, that this is politically motivated because he's a candidate.
Well, it is.
I have no doubt that Donald Trump's timing on the declaration of his candidacy had very much to do with concern about charges that were to be brought against him. But we cannot allow our justice system, which should be neutral with regard to politics, and which I believe is neutral with regard to politics, be held up because of electoral cycles, because anyone could avoid charges by simply declaring themselves as a candidate.
Okay.
So it's critical that this trial is seen through.
What planet are you on?
Adolfo, I will give the last word to you. I just want to direct your answer slightly because Trump is facing, it's a fact, many other cases for inciting the Capitol riots, interfering with the elections, housing classified documents. Should he be held accountable for any of these?
What are you held accountable? That's a loaded question. Held accountable for something he's not responsible for? Should you be held accountable? This is, as I said, chapter 12 or 13 of Get Donald Trump. All of these charges are. Let me make this clear. The person bringing these charges in New York is a politician, a Democrat who ran for office saying, I'm going to get Donald Trump. If that doesn't tell you what this agenda is, what is it? This idea of the rule of law and justice is the system once it gets to court, not the prosecutorial abuse that has taken place here by a political hack. And this is the rest of this nonsense. The same thing happened with the impeachments. All of this has been political, and Donald Trump has only become stronger as a consequence and will likely be the next president of the United States.
Well, that's a very interesting thought to finish on. OK, thank you very much to all our guests. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we're certainly going to be following this story very closely over the weeks, months, indeed years ahead. Adolfo Franco, Claire Finkelstein and Rina Shah.
Thank you.
And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. The handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now. Oh.